I'm 32-time Airbnb superhost Jason Muth. I worked in the media business for over 25 years, and in 2016, I started my Chapter 2 in the world of short-term rentals. Since then, I've welcomed over 5,000 guests and their furry friends to our homes. And now we're here to show you how to create a smart stay. Now, on with the show.
All right. Thank you, Gary and Ken, for joining us. Gary and Ken from Furnished Quarters. Good morning.
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 So before we kind of hop into the topics and what you do and the trends in the space, I'm a little curious just to understand how you got started. Gary, I understand you started this with your brother, Furnished Quarters. What made you decide to get into this space?
Well, at a very young age, and by the way, thanks for having us on your program here. At a very young age, my brother Steve and I started investing in real estate, literally in our 20s. Steve and I both did a small investment on our own for, our personal apartment that we lived in. And in a very short period of time, we did quite well and flipped the apartments and moved on. We took that seed money and started investing into real estate in Manhattan. Back in the 80s, there were a lot of conversions of rental buildings to co-ops and condos. And we took advantage of that by stepping in. And a lot of those tenants who had these really sweetheart leases were able to buy their apartments for literally half price. So we would work with a lot of those tenants who didn't really want to buy, but had this phantom equity, we'll call it, built up, and we were buying those tenants rights to buy the apartment at a sharply discounted price. They made money, we made money, and off we went. So we took that basically seed money and started to buy townhouses in Manhattan. And from that, we said, all right, maybe we can make a few $100 more per month by furnishing them. Our family background is furniture. My dad and grandfather before him had the furniture, had a furniture store in Fairfield County, Connecticut. And had sales all of a sudden skyrocketed as we were starting to furnish our apartments. His bottom line didn't change, but he certainly was selling a lot more furniture. So we started furnishing our townhouses that we owned. And very quickly, those rented up like days, really quickly. And a short period of time later, we got a call from one of our competitors to this day saying they'd like to rent our entire portfolio and put it into their inventory. And we said, well, why? And lo and behold, we realized there was a whole segment of the hospitality space called corporate housing. And we kind of just went on from there.
Now, I don't want to gloss over the beginning story because I know where you are today, operating in a lot of markets, a lot of different properties in a well-run machine for corporate rentals. But it sounded like if you had started in the 80s, you adapted to kind of probably unique market conditions in Manhattan with these tenants having the phantom equity, because that's not like a regulatory scheme that exists in many other places. But also the market changed, in multiple ways from the 80s. We got involved in short-term rentals in the mid-2010s, and I can tell you that a lot has changed just in the 10 years that we've been doing it. So I can only imagine just how much the market's evolved and how much your strategy has evolved since the 80s.
Oh boy, I'll tell you, it's been lots of ups and downs in the market for a whole host of reasons. But if you were able to hold on, I wish we held on. We sold a lot of property. We bought and sold. We're the flip brothers that they were calling us. We bought and sold a lot of property. If we could hold on to all that property from back in the day, we would be that much further ahead. But you can't do that today. The buildings aren't converting like they used to. My kids, Ken being one of them, were quite interested in what we did. And earlier in their careers, we were like, well, I wish we could do that. But now it's a whole different real estate world out there today. Every few years seems like the market does change. So that's a model that we couldn't duplicate today, that's for sure, from what we did in the early 80s.
Yeah. The other part from your introductory story I thought was helpful is that you actually took stock of kind of your unique strengths, and that being your access to furniture and the furniture industry that's there. I hear this sometimes when people are asking where to get started, how to get started. And
Sure.
Sometimes people who have a real estate license and they might have a knowledge in a state that might not be the premier state to be doing this in, but if they have that inside knowledge, that's something that gives them a leg up. So I thought that was a nice creative way to look at your strengths and hop in the market and use that to your advantage.
Yeah, most of our competitors, excuse me, most of our competitors do rent furniture. My brother's really into design. I'm not. I'm more the business side of things. But he goes to North Carolina twice a year where they have the furniture show. He's been to Europe, literally to a houseware trade show. He says the largest trade show he's ever been to. You could cover it in a week. I'm literally looking for corkscrews and dishes and so forth. But so yeah, design has been a big part of Furnished Quarters from day one. It does set us apart from our competitors for sure.
On the design front, do you have kind of a standard set of equipment and furnishings that you use so that once you acquire new property, you can get it set up very quickly, or do you take the time to customize it for each, or is it something in between?
Yeah, we have our own in-house design team. We report up to my brother, but we design to the building, to the market. It's not cookie cutter. You're not going to get the same look in LA versus New York. It's just different. A townhouse feel design will be much different than a full service doorman contemporary building. So you want to, we always say you want to live like a local. So live like a New Yorker, and depending what type of building you're in, you're going to see a different design.
All right. And before I get too far ahead of myself here, what is corporate housing? What is it that you do, and what is it that you prefer?
Well, people talk about corporate housing. They often refer to temporary housing. Overseas, it's service apartments. But our basic model, and the model followed by other companies of any size, is most companies don't own real estate. In fact, our portfolio of owned properties is much smaller than what we lease from others. So early on, we first leased our own townhouses to Furnished Quarters. But then using our contacts in the real estate community, we started renting from others. So the model is you go into a 3-unit building, you rent 10 to 20 apartments. We have as many as 65 in one building today. And you just rent them for a year at a time, sometimes longer term, furnish them, put all the utilities in, set up housekeeping, et cetera. And then we basically now sublet to our clients. That's the model.
Okay. Who's renting from you? Who are your clients?
So I'm happy to speak to that question. So I think that when you think about who's renting to us, it's really a broad spectrum. You have, first of all, it's two larger buckets, right? You have the individual, then you have the corporate customer. And if you're thinking about an individual, that's going to be anybody who, for any reason not related to business, might need an apartment. So that could be someone who needs an apartment for family reasons, right? That could be, typically, it's going to be new child, divorce, change your family dynamic. Potentially you're renovating your home. Someone might need to stay for 30 days plus. And then if you look at the corporate customer, right? That's going to be someone who's relocating, someone who may be part of a group training project, someone who could be interning, someone who could be on a long-term project. That instead of staying in a hotel, prefers to stay in a furnished apartment. And I think a big difference in our company and how we run our business and how others may approach this industry is that we do all 30-day plus days, all month plus days, driven by the regulation in the markets where we participate, right? Where an apartment stay is defined as 30-day plus, but also driven by the demand of our clients. We really don't want to compete with hotels for 1 or 2 day stays. We're looking for everything to be 30 days plus. I think that's also a key differentiator from us and maybe some of the other listeners of the podcast or other companies that people might operate that are maybe in more vacation type destinations where you're doing a week or a longer stay. Everything for us is 30 days plus.
A few years ago, we stayed in a corporate rental for, I believe, 35 days. So just over kind of the threshold you're speaking about there, because we had sold our place and we were waiting to close on our new home. So it's probably a use case that you've seen in there before. But I'm curious about your relationship with the owners of the apartment buildings, because when we were there, it was a mix of residents and the housing. So there were some people who were long-term tenants directly by the owner of the property, and then we were certainly not alone with being in a corporate rental in the space in downtown Boston. So, how do you manage your relationships with the underlying landlord in the cases where you're leasing the units?
Very carefully.
Hmm.
In an ideal world, what we like to do is take apartments and have an entire floor or two or three in a building. That would be ideal because there is going to be the transient nature of what we do. Um, so that's our first choice. But otherwise, in general, and mostly speaking, our clients are corporate. They're paying a lot of money. They're paying more money than anybody else in the building. And so as far as the type of tenant that we attract, it's generally a good group of people that don't cause problems. Now, that's because you make a lot of money and spend a lot of money doesn't mean you make create problems with the building, but certainly no more than any other tenant. And the advantage to a landlord is we're in buildings literally for 20 years. So even in a market like New York, where the vacancy rate is 3, 4, 5%, factor in zero. That's a big incentive for a landlord, and a check that comes every month. First of the month, fifth of the month, whenever it's due, and it's quite advantageous. Also in lease up. For them to rent 30 apartments at a time, day one, take that to a bank, also is quite attractive to a landlord.
And I guess on the other side of that relationship, when you're looking for properties to lease units in, what are the buildings that are attractive to you?
I think that's what's attractive to us is going to be what's attractive to our clients, right? We're essentially trying to place our inventory where we know our clients are going to be interested. So, you have a corporate customer. What's important to them? There's going to be a segment of people that want to be close to the office. I want to be walking distance. I want to be able to roll out of bed and go to work. You have certain people that want to be in trendier neighborhoods. I want to have something that I'm going to be able to do at night, right? Go out, have a bite to eat, have a nice time with my colleagues. You have people that are going to want to be in more family-oriented areas, right? That's where you might have your 2 or 3 bedrooms, close to Central Park in New York City on the Upper East or Upper West Side. And then you have people that may want to be somewhere that's more value-oriented. So, for example, in New York City, they want to be maybe in Jersey City or Hoboken. It's a little bit less expensive, a little bit of a longer commute, but you're going to pay a little bit less than you might pay for a prime area. So we try, something that we pride ourselves in at Furnished Quarters is we have a wide variety of inventory. Gary mentioned the townhomes earlier, trying to have a full range, ranging from that townhouse that may be more appealing to an intern, maybe someone their company's just giving them a stipend, saying here's a few $1,000s, go find a place for yourself to live. And then we have the ultra high end, someone who's relocating their CEO with their family and they need a 3 or 4 bedroom plus 3,000 square foot apartment. We want to have an option for them too. So that's how we approach what inventory we want to work with.
Okay, I come from the short-term rental world where our average stay is much shorter than that. So we're looking at under a week for our average stay, which means that a lot of what we do means making sure that we design the property so that I call it idiot proof, but making sure that it's really readily adaptable for wide ranges of people who are new to the property to come through. But also a lot of our work is about creating the experience for the guests so that they have a good check-in, they have a good stay in a way that a long-term traditional landlord would never think about it. What do you do that's not necessarily geared toward the property to make sure that I don't know if I'd call them guests actually, but your residents, what do you do to enhance their experience working with you so that they might recommend you again in the future or come back to another one of your properties?
You want me to take that one, Ken?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. By the way, we call our tenants guests as well, by the way, even though they're here for 30 days plus. And by the way, our average length of stay is probably about 100 days at Furnished Quarters. We have some guests staying literally for years. But the number one thing I want to leave advice to anybody out there who wanted to start a corporate housing business or short-term rental business is response time and meeting client expectations. At Furnished Quarters, you got to reach out to us. You're going to hear from us within 2 hours. It may not solve your problem within 2 hours, but we're going to acknowledge that your request, you want an extra blanket, pillow, whatever it is, and we set the expectation as when that'll be delivered. If we can do it same day, great. If not, certainly the next day. But just being in touch with your client, high touch, that's the number one way to win the client. And I think that goes for really any business, frankly.
Who within your company is responsible for that communication with it? Do you have staff specialized in it? How do you assign that responsibility?
So we've developed a fairly specialized team depending on what the guest is looking for. So typically it can be your guest service team. Once someone has moved in and they have a question or concern, they reach out to our guest service team, and they're going to be 24/7, somebody available to help with anything you might need. So you talk about the differences between renting from us versus renting from someone who's going to rent you an apartment for 12 months, right? Try calling a leasing office, right, at 7 o'clock at night saying my internet's not working, right? That stuff can go so well. Whereas we want to be there for you. We want to be able to answer that question. Now, before you stay with us, if you're looking for a place to stay, right, that's going to be our reservations and our sales team. And they similarly are going to try and be committed to that 2-hour response time. And it may be that you have a question about your bill, right? And that similarly would be our accounting team. So we, have the company segmented out into the different departments, but everyone aims to be super high touch, super responsive, and just super available to help with any questions that our guests might have.
Okay. And I guess you must do that at scale. About how many properties do you manage at this point?
So without giving away too many of our proprietary information, but we're over 1,000 units, and we're literally across the globe. I'd say about 2/3 of our inventory are on long-term leases, and the third are we'll call them we mural lease. So if we have a client that needs a place in London, we don't have long-term leases there, but we work with highly vetted properties similar to furnished quarters, people that I've known for 20 plus years in most cases. When we're leasing with others, we're truly partnering across the globe. It works similarly to we get a lot of inbound business to our markets from companies that do what we do again across the globe.
Okay. Now, so, I kind of just teed it up just to kind of give our listeners a sense of just how large you've grown over the past few decades. But I want to bring the conversation to help some of our listeners who are, smaller in their operations. They might be getting started. They might just have one or two or a couple of properties. I guess, do you have any advice for somebody in that space who's either considering doing a medium-term rental or corporate rental with their property? Should they enter the space at all? Is it a good space for them? And do you have any advice for somebody who's just starting out?
I have some very specific advice.
Go ahead. I can get some answers, but I'll let you go first.
Yeah, you go first. So Gary mentioned how we do that mirror leasing. So we have clients that come to us and say, I'm moving, my company is opening up an office in XYZ place. And Gary mentioned that's about 1/3 of our business. And we have to go out and find that property for them, right? Because it's a corporate client that we work with on a national basis. And wherever they are sending someone, right, we have to find them a place to stay. So that we end up interacting with many of small landlords, right? People that have just one or two properties. They want to be in the furnished rental space. So there's some very kind of specific things that come up often that I think can make a property very appealing to a company like ours or to a corporate client that could be looking to take on corporate rental. So one thing is flexibility. The big thing that you're going to have is on the back end of the lease, you're dealing with all the things that come with your personal life when you relocate, right? Maybe you're trying to close on a home. You may be doing a renovation. You may not know how long your project at work is going to go. And there needs to be flexibility, right? People love to be able to say with 30 days notice, I need it for a little bit more time and not have to move multiple times during their corporate travel. So that's one thing. The second thing is to not have the space be too highly personalized. Someone who's relocating doesn't want to live with photos of your family, right? They don't want to live with, you may think it's nice to leave like a half bottle of olive oil in the cabinet, but a corporate client is going to see that as a health and safety risk, right? That's already been open, right? Anything that's unopened is of course okay, but they don't want to live with like your half, open spices or, a big bottle of shampoo, right, that is half done, something like that. And then just in general, to have the place be fairly neutral, right? It's great to have a super specific design scheme, but sometimes, and it can be local and reminiscent of where the home or apartment is located. But if it can be too specific, it's sometimes to someone who's relocating, you don't know what anyone's personal taste is. And sometimes it can be a little bit too far in one direction or the other. So that's something that we come across a lot. So just kind of some specific points that I would share in wanting to be appealing to the corporate rental space.
It's so funny to listen to your answer, Ken, because my approach, great answer. You gave a lot of good information there, but my approach is far different. I look at it more from the 30,000 foot level and talk about our industry. Our industry is made up of probably in the U.S. close to 1,000 corporate housing companies. You take out the top 20 or even 10 to 15, they're small. They're single city, up to 100 units. Some providers are, 20, 30, 40 units. And certainly there are plenty of people out there we know Airbnb-ing it, right, with their, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units. So we have an annual conference, corporate housing conference, and it is really more geared toward the smaller provider, not the large ones. Like Furnished Quarters, we have a lot of people. We have a whole tech department, design department, all that. When you're operating in one city, it's you as the owner who's gonna. I'm sure, at least to start, you're gonna be making beds and doing all sorts of things. Buying all the housewares and so forth. I remember that quite well. Going shopping at the Targets of the world and buying 10 of everything, right? And trying to get the best deal possible, dealing with the sales folks at those stores. So. But my number one advice is just understand you have to roll up your sleeve and kind of be a jack of all trades. And you can do quite well. You get to 50 apartments, you can do quite well in one city.
And then the other thing where you might be in a really good position to give some help is taking that person who has just a couple units and starting to scale. Maybe they don't necessarily have aspirations to get to 1,000, but I know in any sort of business, once you start to, add a certain number of clients, a certain stream of business, it becomes a lot to manage and to handle, and you have some new operational challenges. Any advice on somebody who's scaling up their business and adding, who'd like to add more?
You gotta hire good people. You gotta hire good people. And the one thing about corporate housing, it's 365 days a year. Even to this day, it's rare that at least on the weekends or the evening, I'm looking at my email. I personally will step in with a guest who's they all know. My team knows that when someone's on the ledge ready to jump, it's time for me to make that call from the owner. Nothing like getting a call from an owner. So I do a lot of that. I actually enjoy it, talking to our guests and learning what we can do better. But definitely number one is it's great to have a partner. If not a partner, that right-hand person who really just knows the business inside and out. Gotta hire good people, man.
And then kind of the last major subject I definitely wanted to hear from you on are just trends in the business and people staying. I know, I referenced the short-term rental world as an analog where we've seen a lot of changes and things have changed. Consumer expectations is kind of the headline has changed from 10 years ago. And now consumers expect the best level of service, the best level of property in a way that 10 years ago they were very forgiving on. So the kind of only the best survive, I think, going forward. But in other analogous industries, such as co-working, just the way people work, the way people travel, a lot has really kind of changed in the past few years. What are some of the biggest trends that you've seen, and where do you think we're going?
I think a big trend is, like any industry, I think COVID reshaped the temporary housing space. And I think that happened, COVID was at the tail end of the Airbnb-ification, right, of the housing space. When Gary started a company 25 years ago, you have to do a lot of explaining, right, as to what is furnished quarters, what do you do, what do you mean it's furnished, it includes everything. And then all of a sudden something came around called Airbnb, and everyone said, "Oh, it's like Airbnb." And we said, "No, but it's professionalized, right? It's not just my apartment, right? It's we do it at a professional level." So what happened was, right, that starts to seep into our customers and our clients, who then better understand what we're offering, or maybe say, hey, I'd like to have an Airbnb, but maybe can I get a more professional or upscale version? So as our clients gain a better understanding of exactly what it is that we do and what might be out there, then you have COVID happen, right? And what happens during COVID, all of a sudden people need more space, right? People need an office to work from home. People might say, I'm in a big city, living in an apartment. I'd like to be somewhere with an outdoor space, maybe in a single family home. So what that I think has led to is our clients asking much more of us, both from the experience, but also what types of properties do we have? They aren't just saying, hey, I want to have a one bedroom next to my office. I'm not going to the office, right? They might say, I want to be with my family in a 4-bedroom space in the suburbs while I telecommute and then go to the office twice a week. So I think that people have a better understanding of what our industry is, what we offer, and what's out there. And in turn, they're wanting more, both in terms of the experience, but also in terms of variety.
Yeah, I'll echo some of Ken's comments. When we started the first 15 years of our business, there was no Airbnb. The elevator speech was a long one to try to explain people what I did for a living. And now with Airbnb out there, it's really helped put a focus on this segment of the hospitality industry. And what a corporate housing company can do over an Airbnb is provide a consistent, clean product with high touch, with security, which you don't often get with Airbnb. 24/7 service you don't get with an Airbnb. All depends on that unit owner and how resourceful, what is his response time, et cetera. So, we're thankful for Airbnb. It's really helped us. And, compared to a hotel, what you get in a corporate apartment, you get 3 times the space at half the price. And, if I can generalize, it's been, I think the outlook for our industry is actually quite positive.
I mean, the visibility of Airbnb is a bit of a double-edged sword because it certainly shines a light on our properties and what it is that we do. Um, but it also, it, I hear a lot of discussions about our properties, and it's as though short-term rentals are a new idea. It's as though corporate rental is this new idea that Airbnb invented, which is not at all the case. These have been arrangements have been around for generations, but it's kind of stolen a little bit of the narrative of what it is in how we do it. Um, in kind of lastly, I mean, you're a global company, and I contrast that to us when we're pretty localized to one region. Are there any trends that you see kind of among the world in different places, or are there, what other challenges are there to operate in a global scale in different markets?
There are some concerns today. Here we are in 2025. Um, we get a lot of overseas folks coming in domestically, right? So now it's tougher to get a visa. You know, uh, there's some negative energy here in the U.S. People are, maybe are gonna not come for a variety of reasons. So that's certainly a concern. Every year it seems like we have a different challenge that we have to face up to and make sure we're marking for the right folks. Uh, but you really have to be diverse. We have a diverse group of clients for sure. We hit pretty much every industry. Um, so in recent years, insurance has been a real good one, especially during COVID, because still during COVID, right, where people are still having floods and fires and other calamities that they need to renovate the apartment. So we're really highly focused on insurance. That's been a growing segment for us. Um, but I will tell you, kind of getting back to the beginning about who our clients are, traditionally half of all of our clients are due to a relocation, and relocation business is down. That's certainly a trend we're seeing. Those relocation companies that you can, major companies out there, that their business has slid a bit because who wants to really move? You're sitting in a home in one city paying 2.5% on your mortgage. And now you're saying that, okay, I'm going to get transferred to another city across the U.S. Now I'm going to pay a 6 or 7% interest rate for the same home. So that's been a challenge as well. So again, the reload down, we're looking at other segments.
Mm. And I'll just add, you mentioned global trends. One thing to look at is inventory. It's just interesting, going back earlier, You mentioned, what's it like when you're a corporate tenant staying for 35 days or 100 days, living amongst people on longer term leases who are longer term residents of a property. What's interesting is that if you look abroad, specifically in like the Asia region, it's very different. They don't typically have, we'll call them mixed communities, right? Where people staying for a shorter period alongside a longer period. They have dedicated buildings for serviced apartments. There's some brands, like the Ascot brand, for example, is very large in the Asia Pacific region. They have thousands of properties. And the serviced apartment is its own unique property sector there, where you have dedicated buildings to serviced apartments for 30-day plus stays. Whereas here in the US, oftentimes serviced apartments are amongst longer term properties. So that creates a bit of a different experience. And as you go to Europe, it's kind of in between, right? There's some properties dedicated to serviced apartments, some that are amongst longer term stays. So that's definitely something that we're seeing as far as a trend. Another trend is apartments are getting smaller and smaller, right? There are properties that are purpose built as serviced apartments. Maybe there'll be studios with a Murphy bed, right? I toured a property in New York City a couple of weeks ago. It was very small. It's a A++ area. Obviously it was a high cost to build per square foot. And, what they're calling their studio layout, did have a kitchenette of a kind, but it was just very small. And there's something to be said for older properties that are a bit bigger, but I think that's definitely a trend. Smaller spaces due to construction costs. And then when you're looking internationally, the properties can differ depending where you are as far as where serviced apartments are and where the longer term residents.
Thank you. All right. And before we go, how can people learn more about Furnished Quarters, about your history, about how they could do business with you?
Feel free to first check out our website, furnishedquarters.com. So it's furnished with an ED, quarters as an S at the end.com. Anybody can certainly reach out to myself. Via email is probably best. It's just Gary, Gary, at furnishedquarters.com. Or Ken, what's your email? Is it just
Ken at furnishedquarters.com, and happy to help with any questions that may have come up during this talk and help with anything we can.
All right. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Gary, for coming on to the SmartStay Show. I'm Rory Gill. If you're looking to get a hold of me, you can find me at str.legal, and I'm happy to set up an appointment with you there. Thank you.